If you were asked to decide if we should be in or out of the European Union, what would you decide? If the answer is I don't know, then this is the documentary for you.
Very soon it's likely that UK voters are going to be asked to decide, are we in or out? But do we know enough? And if we left, how would it affect us?
With so much information out there, all saying different things, it's no wonder people are confused.
We're 4 final year law students on a mission to find out what this talk of leaving the EU is really all about, and how will it affect the everyday person. Is it really that important? There was only one way to find out. First stop, Westminster.
Never in the entire history of this nation's politics has there been so much empty, meaningless flummery than this present sort of great phony spume of indignation about Europe. Look, nobody has actually analysed what it means.
But our search didn't stop there. We went to Wales.
You're either in or out.
And Ilford, where a certain member of the European Parliament did not mince his words.
Well, my entire political career has been founded on the basis that Britain should leave the EU.
With all this discussion, it's no wonder people are confused about which direction to take.
I mean, if you believe that the UK leaving the EU is something which would be highly damaging for the UK's economy in the long term, then you should be scared on that level. Scared about what the UK being out of the EU would mean really for your children and grandchildren.
The European Union is a family. It's people coming together, stronger together than we are separately.
We are stronger in the European Union. We are richer in the European Union. We have a greater clout on the world stage in the European Union. And the European Union means a lot to Britain, as to the rest of Europe, for the preservation of peace and prosperity on our continent. And that is why I think it is vital that we fight for it.
There is nothing inside the European Union that we do that we couldn't do outside it. I think it's safe to say I think Britain should leave the European Union. We should never have gone in the first place.
So once you're out, you have to be careful about what you can get back into again.
The referendum is a very good opportunity to clear the air, so we can actually have a discussion about the substantive issues.
People have a responsibility to actually find out what is important to them. And those people who are interested have to make the effort.
If Britain were to leave the EU, what do you think the impact would be?
Isolation.
Devastating.
And I think we would be foolish in the extreme.
It seems to me lunatic to give away that free trading relationship.
In terms of Wales, it's a no-brainer.
Leading the debate for the better off outers is the UKIP party.
We cannot control immigration policy into this country and be a member of the EU.
Who seem to be gaining in popularity.
The United Kingdom Independence Party, who are having the time of their lives.
If you were there, you would see that we're having some fun. And if you didn't laugh, you'd cry. So we do our best to keep cheerful.
This is not the first time our membership has been debated.
No, no, no.
But it is the first time since 1975 that voters will have the opportunity to vote yes or no in a referendum.
So, to help you to decide, we've answered your questions.
What would happen if we left the EU?
We have an agreement, it's free trade. If that were to come to an end, we would have to renegotiate. And obviously in those negotiations, we'd be penalised. So it would have a massive effect in terms of exports and in terms of trade.
Well, those businesses which export in any numbers to the European Union will find no doubt job losses because, as I say, they'll bring in tariffs. It will make it harder for us to compete with those companies who are in the European Union and trading within the EU.
We make ourselves as a country much stronger because we act in unison with the other countries that are around us. And I think that's a very important thing to do to protect our own citizens.
Don't we need the EU to trade?
People say, oh, it's all about trade and 3 million jobs depend upon membership of the EU. None of that is true. We could trade with the EU outside just as easily as we do inside, because this is down to World Trade Organization rules. So if we left the EU, they couldn't stop trading with us.
If we want to influence global trade treaties, we need to be in the European Union, or our voice will simply be too small and too quiet to have any impact.
Trade is a big issue. 40% of our trade's with Europe, as we know. People suggest that we can leave and still carry on to trade, and I think there's some truth in that. But it removes us from our biggest market, and it removes us from the strong allies that we have in Europe, and I think it damages the UK.
Norway and Switzerland are not in the EU. Switzerland is a very, very different country. I mean, I think that there are specific rules. Switzerland has 2,000 years of neutrality. So it's a very different system, and it has obviously the financial market. But Norway is a much more interesting example. Do you know that Norwegians sign up to 94% of European legislation voluntarily? They don't have to, but they do, because it is in their interest to do so. And one of the things it is in their interest to do so is because they are a trading nation.
Well, I think Norway and Switzerland in particular cases, which have grown up over the years, I don't think necessarily that their deals are ones that the UK will be able to win, and we wouldn't be able to guarantee the right terms of accession into any sort of new deals that people would like.
The European Union is Britain's biggest trading partner. A lot of jobs in Britain depend on our trade with the European Union, and I think we would be foolish in the extreme to throw away something that generates so much employment in our country, particularly at a time like this, when we're in the middle of a global recession and there's so much pressure on people, incomes and employment.
A lot of people will come build a factory here because they know they can enter into the European market, they can sell their wares there. That could be in financial services, manufacturing, any sort of industry, aviation. If you then can't use Britain as a hub to go into Europe, then and you have choices of where else to base your factories, the question is, will you base it here, or will you just put it in Holland or the Netherlands or Spain? And that's new investment and new money that's coming in, and we need that all the time. So, and that can come from Singapore, China, America, all sorts of companies that like coming to Britain, but they want access to those 500 million people in the market.
If you're an Asian company seeking to invest in the European Union, which is still one of the biggest markets in the world, why would you go and invest in a small offshore island when you could see yourselves right in the middle of the European Union without any barriers, allowing you to access the rest of that market?
That affects the person in the street, because that affects the tax revenues, that affects the health of the economy overall, and it affects the amount of money that the government can spend on welfare and education and reform and all the other things which people on the street want. So it affects them in the long term like that, and that's really the bigger picture.
Do we lose democracy by being in the EU?
I think it's important to remember when people say that Brussels is dictating what we do, or Brussels is making laws for us, that we're the ones making the laws. We're the ones in Brussels, we're the ones in the Council of Ministers, and we're the ones making laws on behalf of everybody. That often those laws are about having harmonised standards across the EU on products and on trade, so that we can trade more easily. And those rules are then generally exported outside the EU to become the global standard. So the EU's become the global standard setter. And I think it's fair to say that the European Parliament, certainly in this country, needs to do more to be really fully recognised as a democratic function.
The democratic deficit, to me, if there is our fault. We elect plenty of MEPs to Brussels, and they should be doing a little bit more, because who actually calls in their MEP to do anything?
I don't think it's good for any European country, because it's anti-democratic in its nature, and it's founded on lies and myths. You know, that we need it for prosperity, we need it for peace. All of these arguments are easily demolished.
If there is a democratic deficit, it's not a structural deficit. It's a deficit of poor practice, bad practice.
Most people, quite rightly, would rather think about the rest of their lives than the intricacies of our relationship with our European partners. But we do need to educate people as far as possible, because this is the foundation of our foreign policy.
Can David Cameron renegotiate our relationship with the EU?
It's a very difficult subject for the British, because our relationship with the continent is always going to be different from the French and the Germans, who have a different historical perspective on Europe and on their relationship to their neighbours than we do. And I think also the tenor of public debate has changed in the last 20 years. That's partly the fault of politicians, it's partly the responsibility of the media.
Well, right now, David Cameron doesn't have enough information to vote in the referendum that he says will come, but we don't necessarily know will. He's been asked in the House of Commons, would he vote yes or no? He doesn't know, because he doesn't know what he's going to be voting on, because he hasn't put on the table what changes he wants, and he hasn't discussed with our European partners what their view of that might be.
Every member state has a right to negotiate the terms that they have in a particular deal. Obviously, a deal has to be struck. It's noticeable that the Prime Minister stopped talking about repatriation and started talking about renegotiation. We tend to talk about reform. There are things which need changing in Europe. The best way to do it is to work with allies to do it, not to work on your own. In 27 member countries, if it's you against the rest, you don't get anything done. And that's really part of the message that we try to bring, that if you want to get what you want done, you work with others to do it. And shouting from the sidelines on your own just doesn't get you anywhere.
I'm, as you may have gathered, fairly pro-European. However, I'm not completely looking at the whole thing through rose-coloured spectacles.
It was a contract, which is what I always expect from the Tories, and they never disappoint me. He's doing exactly what Harold Wilson did back in 1974, except he's doing it in slow motion. Harold Wilson said, if you vote Labour, I'll give you a referendum on the EU. I did vote Labour in 74. We got the referendum in 75 with his renegotiated terms, which actually amounted to nothing very much at all, and nobody can remember what they are without looking them up.
The attitude there from other member states and the regions and the countries is UK and David Cameron don't really want to be part of Europe, so they don't really take any notice of anything that he or the UK says. So the voice of the UK and the voice of Wales is nullified.
How are laws made in the EU?
All legislation is proposed by the Commission. Their team of bureaucrats propose this legislation. That then goes to the European Parliament. All of the UK MEPs together only amount to 8%. So even if all the different parties from the UK agreed on something, either it was good or it was bad, we can't change the outcome.
It is the most overtly democratic part of the European Union. We do vote in those MEPs from around the country, and so as a project it has meant to boost the democratic accountability of the EU.
Aren't we more powerful in the EU?
We don't need to take our own kind of evidence on that. It's worth listening to the Americans. And the number of people who came out, senior American politicians, both Republican and Democrat, when we announced the referendum, pointing out just how important the European Union was to the strength of our own foreign policy and our relationship with the United States, should give us an indication of why politically this is a vital project for Britain. And I think if we leave, if we take the kind of Nigel Farage Little England approach, we diminish ourselves in the world sphere, we diminish our voice, we become smaller in our view of the world, we become a less generous nation in our aspiration, and it would be a massive step backwards.
We have a positive programme about how we try and fix some of these problems, and you can't do any of that inside of the European Union.
By sharing our voice with the rest of the European Union, we have a much bigger voice on the world stage, and I think it's very important that we do not allow ourselves to be picked off by becoming isolationist and wishing to act on our own, so that ultimately we have far less influence in the world.
We'd be isolated, and the 21st century is a hard and dangerous place. It's not the sort of place to be isolated in.
I think we're a country that punches above its weight. And one of the ways we punch above our weight is through having good say in multilateral organisations like the UN. We're on the Security Council, we have a permanent seat there, and through our ability to influence the EU. And so we need to keep all these things. It's not one or t'other. They're all important to help us to carry on punching above our weight.
How does the EU affect immigration?
We would stop the absolute free movement of people, because what the EU is about, it's about the creation of a political state, a centralised European political state, the borderless state. Now, why would any country, Britain in particular, want to have open borders?
This country needs migrants. It needs migrant workers, particularly when the economy is doing well. It is not doing so well at the moment, so there's a pushback, but we'll need them again.
People don't get up off their backsides and leave their home country, travel to a different country with a different culture and a different language because they want to sit on their backsides and spend benefits. They want to work. They're coming here to improve their lives. Many of the immigrants that come to this country are some of the most enterprising people who are here, and I think they make our society richer.
What we do is we have open borders so that we allow anybody to come in, and of course they can also claim benefits. They can come in, they will be given housing and they'll be given benefits, and we've had Mr Cameron say that all this has got to stop. He can't stop it because it's EU law. You cannot discriminate against somebody in the EU on the basis of nationality.
In our classes in university, we're told that they can't come over and claim benefits from day one. There are a couple of loopholes for, say, self-employed people, but not that they can claim benefits.
Well, this is as you said, there's a loophole, and this main one is this self-employed, which is why you've got people selling the big issue on the street actually picking up thousands of pounds in housing benefit because they claim to be self-employed, and these have been widely publicised cases.
The stuff that is being said about Romanian and Bulgarian immigrants to this country, about banning immigrants to this country from having housing, health, education, and all those welfare benefits is like nothing I've ever heard since the days of Enoch Powell. I've never heard such overt, utter racism, and it's an indication partly of the way that UKIP has moved the argument, but also the way that when times are tough, it's easier to find a scapegoat than it is to find a solution.
Now you've heard both sides of some of the key arguments surrounding our membership of the EU, we hope you have a better understanding of the consequences should we leave.
Not just the consequences for the UK as a whole, but for you, your family and your community.
We feel that the UK would be isolated out of the EU. There can be no doubt that would be significant change to the future of our economy and our power on the global stage.
It's for you to decide if that change is for better or worse.